You all look beautiful as usual. Thank you so much for being here, being on time. I just want to remind you that we need to show our ultimate attention and etiquette and manners as we soak in all of the wisdom that will be shared with us today. I don't have any other announcements at this time, so we are going to move forward in our Beacon Forum with our invocation by Ms. Zaria Walker, followed by the introduction of our speaker by Mr. Benz Joseph. Please give Ms. Walker a hand clap as she comes.
Good morning, Clinton family. Please bow your heads and join me for prayer. Dear God, thank you for your great love and blessings over our lives. We ask for your guidance so that we may walk fully in your blessing and goodness today. We ask that your face will shine upon us, that you will open the right doors for our lives, and that you will close the right and wrong doors. God, protect us from those we need to walk away from. Give us a heart of wisdom to hear your voice and make us strong in your huge favor and grace. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Great morning, Golden Bears. My name is Benz Joseph. I'm a freshman here at Clayton College, majoring in business. And I'd like to thank you all for attending our Beacon Forum today. Today's guest is Mr. Montreal Belton. Mr. Belton is an experienced criminal, civil, and educational litigator and has represented clients at all levels of South Carolina state courts and in South Carolina Federal District Court. Mr. Belton represents clients in hearings and in trials in the court system, as well as before local school boards and educational hearing officers. He has successfully tried cases before a jury and relentlessly represents students and parents in urgent educational matters such as school expulsions, special education due process hearings, and individualized education plan meetings. As a former school teacher, principal, and South Carolina's Director of School Transformation, Mr. Belton is knowledgeable and prepared to advocate for students and parents seeking a voice in their child's education. Many of Mr. Belton's clients are ordinary citizens that have been charged with misdemeanor or felony crimes, students that have been expelled from school, or persons that have been injured because of the negligence of somebody else. Mr. Belton served 6 years in the United States Army Reserves, received his bachelor's and master's from the University of Winthrop, and has a doctorate in educational leadership from University of North Carolina, Charlotte. He has also a Juris Doctorate from the University of South Carolina School of Law and is admitted to practice law in South Carolina state courts and South Carolina Federal District Court. Please join me in welcoming our guest, Mr. Montreal Belton.
So I'm not sure if you all have had the opportunity to see yourselves from my vantage points, but those red blazers are absolutely fire. They are absolutely fire. So whomever's idea that is, 2 thumbs up, man. They look good. President. All right, Mr. President. So from this vantage point as students, you all look phenomenal. So I appreciate, thank you so much for the invitation, Mr. President McCorn, whom I have known now for more than 20 years. Had a past relationship, his affiliation with the AME Zion Church and my former church, and he and my former pastor were friends, and obviously we became friends. And early on in our marriage, it was he and his wife in a marriage counseling session he did in Chicago one time that really helped us get through some of those very tough moments when we were newlyweds. And now we are sharing some of that wisdom that you and Miss McCorn shared. We're sharing it now with other newlyweds. So thank you, 20 years later, and we're appreciative. Ms. Knox, thank you so much for extending the invitation. And I just looked at my phone and my email at 10:53. I guess she was getting a bit nervous because she sent me another email. If you need to call me, this is my telephone number. So she was worried that I would not show. And you know, it is, and I'll get to my presentation, it is one of those moments where if there were a legitimate reason not to show, I wouldn't show. I have an older brother. Before my mother and father were married, my dad had an older child, and I have an older brother, and they unexpectedly found his mother dead this morning. And so that's the news I woke up to this morning, what I'm dealing with. So I'm leaving, immediately driving up to Thomasville, North Carolina, to be with my older brother and his family. And it just reminds us of how fragile life is and how mortal we are. So it's these moments like this that become important to make us realize where is our space and time in this life, and this mere moment we have in this thing called time in life. And so I am going to spend my time, as an attorney, there are many gory stories that I can tell, but Ms. Knox made it clear that you all don't want to hear a lecture. And generally, when a lawyer stands up to talk, particularly young people, because I have a son that's exactly you all's age and a daughter that's not far behind you all. My son is a freshman in college as well, right in the same peer group as you all, probably hang out. If any of you all are local basketball players, you probably play basketball with my son quite often, because that's all he does is play basketball. So I'm, as your president, is probably concerned about your grades, I'm concerned about his at the end of the semester as well, because he seems to spend a little more time playing basketball than studying. So we'll see how that works out. But nevertheless, when I'm talking to young people your age, my son included, my daughter included, they want to hear the gory part of law. If there's a crime that's on television and I happen to be representing the person that's accused of that crime, they want to hear about it. And the children still watch television and they see something on the news and they want to know the details of it. Or if there's an accident or someone is killed in a car accident or something, they want to know what's going on. My daughter attends a local high school, and if I happen to be representing a family and she knows the kid that's expelled or is charged with something, then she wants to know, Daddy, what's going on? But that's not. And so in thinking about my presentation, it was those things that I thought about telling, because those are the things that are interesting to young people. But then I said, I am coming to a college campus. And on a college campus, as I often tell my son, that we've got to think deeper about this world that we live in, and we've got to think deeper. And I want you all to think deeper than just cases that I'm involved in. And I want to talk to you about the legal system and this underpinning that we have that's called our Constitution, that has created this system, quite frankly, that separates America from every other country in the world. What holds us in place now is this thing called the rule of law. And what we have seen in the past 3 years is really how fragile the rule of law is in America. And what I want to talk to you about is the underpinning of America jurisprudence and the attack that's on America's jurisprudence. So Frederick Douglass once said that a man's right rests in 3 boxes. That first box being the ballot box. And let me talk about that here. And let me talk about that here shortly. And he says the ballot box is under attack. The ballots, that's a whole big scam. Now, I don't know who said this. I pulled it off and it was in the context. And I'm going to talk a lot about our former President Trump here, because really and truly, I'm making no secret about it. I'm not here, but I do think he is the architect of this attack that we're having on American jurisprudence and in America as we know America. That Donald Trump has this mentality that, like a Putin or like Chai in China and these other people, that the rule of law doesn't matter, rules don't apply to me. And we as African Americans have never been able to live under a guise that rules don't apply to us. As a matter of fact, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I was told that rules will apply to you more than they will apply to some of your colleagues, that you have to be better, you have to do better, you have to move differently, because the same consequences that others have, your consequences may be worse. But then grandmother would say it differently. She would say, God doesn't the same level of grace to everybody. So you have to ensure that you're not putting yourself in a position where others can make decisions about your life. So she went on to say, as I turned 18 years old, right that we have. And the one thing that makes us all equal, despite racism, despite financial resources, is we all have one vote. And with that vote comes a lot of power and responsibility. And so what we have found here in the last 2 years, as Frederick Douglass said back in the 1850s, this ballot box is now under attack. 2 weeks ago, I've been tangentially involved in a case, and I'm not the lead attorney. I'm not a paid attorney. I'm not listed on any of the things, so I don't want to misrepresent my position on it, but I've been following very closely and working with colleagues in this case called Alexander versus the South Carolina State Conference of the NAACP. What I have found to be very intriguing is most South Carolinians didn't even know this case existed, didn't know that it was moving through our court system, did not know where we were. And 2 weeks ago, this case was argued before the United States Supreme Court. I was in Washington, D.C., sitting on the front row of the Supreme Court with the 9 justices hearing the arguments that are being made by the state of South Carolina. And part of that case involved right here in this area where we are sitting now, the 5th Congressional District. In the United States now, particularly in our state legislators, there has become a majority, very conservative, or what some would deem MAGA Republicans, who have very extreme views on book banning and those things. That's a whole nother lecture. Hopefully you invite me back and I'll have a conversation about that. And so one of the things to control all of this is to make sure that there's a control of local politics and there's a control of legislative districts and congressional districts. So in South Carolina, they withdrew the congressional districts based on the 2020 census. And what they found coming out of the 2020 census is something happened down in Charleston, on the coast of Charleston. A Democrat was elected. And so now you had Congressman Jim Clyburn and you had Congressman Joe Cunningham, who was a Democrat. And Republican legislators said that will not happen. So we're going to gerrymander and we're going to draw the lines and we're going to ensure that there's only going to be, according to the Voting Rights Act, one majority minority district, and that will be the district that Congressman Clyburn is in, and we will not have another majority minority district. So they withdrew the districts in South Carolina to include Congressional District 5, where we live here now, and the NAACP sued. The NAACP sued based on, and this is where my conversations with colleagues were involved, the NAACP sued based on that this was, you use race to produce these congressional districts. And so what happened in this case, the district court heard the case. The 3-member panel came back and said, what you did in the 5th Congressional District, which is where we are now, said that is legal. What you did in the 2nd Congressional District, that is legal. But what you did in the 1st Congressional District in Charleston is not legal, because essentially, and I'm simplifying it for the sake of, and the brevity of time here, is essentially the state legislator went downtown Charleston, which is majority Black and has a lot of what we call cosmopolitan, Caucasian young people who are not buying some of the political theories of their foreparents, and essentially got about 30,000 African Americans downtown Charleston and literally picked up their district and moved it into Congressman Clyburn's district and said, that is your district and that is where you will be. And we had a federal court in the state of South Carolina, just like we had a federal court in Alabama, say, absolutely not. What you did was race-based and it cannot and it should not happen. And so the state of South Carolina, to include our governor, to include our local congressman, Ralph Norman, who filed an amicus brief against this. Our governor filed an amicus brief, and the state of South Carolina, led by our legislators, countersued the NAACP, appealed the thing, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And now the Supreme Court will make a decision on whether or not South Carolina has violated the 14th Amendment in using race as a proxy to create congressional districts. And their theory is, and so what our Supreme Court has said historically, and why this is important to you, that they can use politics to draw congressional lines to meet their political needs, but they cannot use race as a proxy to achieve that. What the state of South Carolina essentially argued is most Black people vote Democrat, so we can't create things for our political thing unless we move Black people. And so that's a whole issue now that we're waiting in June that will come down. The reason I bring this as an important thing, and I wanted to give you a brief lecture on that, because Frederick Douglass talked about this in the 1850s, where if we don't protect the ballot box, if we don't protect the rights of people to vote and how we move around and how we vote and get involved in the political process, then these are the things that happens to us. The next thing he said was the jury box, the ballot box, and the jury box. I am an attorney. And again, I can tell you about cases. I've tried lots and lots and lots and lots of cases. Tried a case here 2 weeks ago. There's nothing that's more frustrating to me, and I understand it. I grew up with a mother who worked in a textile mill, and certainly my mom, if she had been called to jury duty, most probably and probably would not have been called to jury duty, because my mom was a former employee of the Abbeville County Sheriff's Office, so she probably would have been stricken immediately from most juries. But if she were called to jury duty, particularly when she went to work in a textile mill, most probably would not have been able to serve, because she's paid by the day, and if she's not at work, she doesn't get paid. Now, for jury duty, you can't be terminated from your job for jury duty, but you can't be terminated, but you obviously are not paid. It's a very small amount of money that you make for jury duty. What has become extremely concerning to me is right now, there's not a jury of your peers, whether it's a civil case, whether it's a criminal case. Rarely in York County and rarely with any jury that I see across the state of South Carolina does it reflect most often who my clients are. And what's very frustrating about that is oftentimes when we get the jury list and after the case is over, we are allowed in South Carolina as attorneys that I can reach out to potential jurors or people who served on the jury. And I often ask, I make it a point, my staff and I, or my private investigator, we make it a point to try to reach out to the African Americans who were called on jury duty, who always seems to find a reason not to serve on the jury. And many of them just don't understand the importance of sitting there for a week or 2 weeks and serving on jury duty, to understand that the diversity of thought, the diversity of experiences, why those things really matter in a jury room. Your voice has power in a jury room to help someone understand an African-American male that's 18 years old. I had a case in Lancaster, a very quick story. Won't go into the details, but the case came down to whether or not this young man had 1 cell phone or 2 cell phones. And the conversation that I understand was had in that jury room about it's not uncommon for a young person to have 2 cell phones and why you have 2 cell phones, and one has cellular service, one only has Wi-Fi service, and one you're doing gaming on and other things. It was just a very interesting conversation. But that perspective, I'm 50 years old, and that's still a concept that was foreign to me. But having someone of that generation in that room, bringing that difference of opinions, become extremely important. So as a lawyer, what I am here to say to you, that if you are called to jury duty, whether it's here locally or somewhere in your former community, that your service on jury duty is extremely important. More importantly, it's this attack that we have that our jury system and our court system and our legal system has no integrity. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the rule of law that has kept us as a country. It's the rule of law that I would argue that probably kept slaves from killing the slave masters. It's the rule of law that kept your grandparents and probably your great grandparents and my grandparents during Jim Crow and those eras from doing things. Because if there was no threat that they would go to jail or be killed by mobs and those mobs would not be prosecuted, there's a great likelihood that we would have had anarchy and probably more than one civil war in the last couple of years in our country. It's the rule of law has been the only thing that has kept our country, in my opinion, from just imploding on itself. Steve Bannon, who was one of the leaders in former President Trump's inner circle in his administration when he was in office, said how in the hell is he going to get a fair trial? The whole thing is rigged. When Steve Bannon is on trial, which eventually was pardoned by Trump. But, this is what the president of the United States, a constitutional officer, is saying, our system. And so if you keep saying this over and over and over and over again, then even people who may not follow his politics begin to believe his rhetoric, that the system is rigged, no one gets a fair shake, no one has an opportunity to be fair. And so this attack, and if we eradicate this system and this rule of law, history has taught us people of color and people without means will be the ones who are most impacted. People who have the resources, generally speaking, will not be impacted by these challenges. So, and the last thing that and this is just a last quote here, and I literally pulled this yesterday before I sent it to Ms. Knox just to kind of see what was going on. I mean, this was a former president posted on his Truth Social, which is his kind of equivalent to Twitter, says, Fannie Willis, she's an African-American female who's prosecuting the case against Trump and his co-conspirators down in Georgia. African-American female, about my age, who's doing her job, who prosecutes people all of the time, black people, white people. He's just basically attempted to make her a mockery and someone who's dishonest and just a pawn of the system that doesn't work. He said, wants desperately to indict me on ridiculous grounds. He attacked her at a campaign rally. He referring to her as a 52-year-old prosecutor, as a young racist in Atlanta. But the most damning thing he said to her is that she's having a sexual relationship with a leader of a gang. I mean, he posted this on Truth Social, and people who follow his rhetoric and believe his rhetoric, this is what they come to understand about a lady who's simply elected by the constituents of Atlanta, who's simply trying to do her job as she has done with others. And the last thing he said was the cartridge box. And even though this was said in November 15th of 1867, it still rings true today. And I think we saw this on January the 20th. We saw January the 6th, excuse me. We saw this in January 6th, 2 years ago of 2021, that this is the attack that we're under. And if we don't protect the things that are important in our democracy, the things that we refer to as the rule of law, this is the result. We saw it once in 1861. We're seeing it now in the Middle East and other places of the world that do not have this rule of law. And this is and Frederick Douglass predicted this, and this was after the Civil War. The Civil War ended in 1865. So this is after the Civil War. He recognized the power that comes in that Constitution. And if we eradicate that doctrine, the thing that holds us together, then this is what will ultimately happen in this great country of ours. So as I conclude to take questions, the reason why I felt like that this conversation was more important than my going into some gory details about being a lawyer, because you all are the torchbearers. The reality of it is I'm probably 15 or so years from exiting stage right. Your president here is probably a little closer. He's a little older than I am. He's probably 10 years or so from exiting. And certainly we will be on the sidelines cheering you on. Certainly we will be being mentors and helping you with these things. But the reality of it is you all are the next generation. You're the ones who are going to have to stand and protect some of these things that are most at stake, because for the most part, it's the people that look like you and me, and particularly those of you who are of the male gender. If we don't protect these things, we're the ones who are most likely to be impacted negatively by the eradication of these things. So I say to you, as you're here becoming educated, and many of you will matriculate on to other schools, to careers, to places in society, that you really have an opportunity to do, as I see often posted and promoted on a lot of the literature here. You have the beacon. And as you're moving, you are the beacon. And as you're moving into these different places in life that I hope that you will think about these fundamental principles that make us American, and that you too will stand and try to protect some of these things and preserve them for the next generation so they can enjoy some of the opportunities that I've enjoyed and certainly you're enjoying now. So I'm going to pause here because I understand that there may be that you all enjoy asking questions, and certainly I'll let you be the timekeeper and I'll answer, and I'll try to be brief in my answers, which will provide. But I don't want to forget this before I ask you for questions. I actually have hired 2 Clinton College students. I always hire for the summer. And actually right now, I really kind of need someone in the office now. So this is totally off subject. But if anyone is interested in being a lawyer, potentially interested in working in a law firm, it's not like it looks on television, and it's not like it looks on Suits, and that's not the type of environment, all right? So that's television. That ain't real life. It's a lot of gritty work and paper filing and watching videos and those things. But I'm really interested, and I didn't share this with Dr. McCoy, but every student I've ever had from Clinton over the past 2 years have been phenomenal. I know I shared it with Reverend Crump, have been phenomenal employees, extremely smart, have worked hard. And so I am always interested in that. And I have, with the exception of one, it was a colleague's daughter, I always try to target African-American students and give them that opportunity. So I'm very, very public about that. So with that being said, I'll answer any questions. Oh, I'm sorry, young lady. Yes, ma'am. Which district do I work in? So I'm a private attorney now, and my office is over on Saluda Street. If you're familiar with Rock Hill, it's kind of really the next block over. If you go down Heckle, it's the first left at the red light down Heckle, and it's right in front of the Family Dollar. So I'm a private attorney who works here locally. Yes, ma'am. You know, it's an interesting story, and thank you for asking. I'm gonna give you the brief part of it. The young lady at the very back. Yeah, here's her. So thank you for asking that question. I didn't want to spend my time giving my biography, but I really always appreciate that question. I actually became an educator because I didn't do what I was supposed to do as an undergrad. The reality of it is, and which is why I have so much grace, for probably too much grace. So I got an in-school suspension as a high school student. I had to read. I've always been a very voracious reader, and that's, I'm just kind of fortunate. My wife reads a lot. I read a lot. And so I read Thurgood Marshall's book. And at that point, I knew there was a very significant event that happened while I was in college, the Simpson trial. And there was a man that was just fair, and I was going to be in Congress. I just could not make the connection, though, that in order to get in law school, you had to have a certain GPA and you had to score a certain amount on the LSAT, because I had always done fairly well academically. And I always tell people I was really never around smart people until I got to law school. And I realized, wow, there are some really smart people in the world. And so literally I got to my senior year of college at Winthrop, and I applied to 5 law schools, and I did not get in to any of them. And so I had to go to work. And so there was a man named James Knox who came through. I had been working in a mentoring program at Winthrop, and he said, why don't you be a teacher? So I scrambled at the last minute. You work well with children. I scrambled at the last minute, got my license to teach. At that time, teachers were like now, but at that time, really, teachers were in a rarity, and particularly African-American males. There was a high recruiting effort for African-American males. I got a job teaching, and that's how I ended up being a teacher for 5 years and being a principal for 4 or 5 years. In the process, I didn't apply for law school immediately, so I got my master's degree. I started dating a girl who was working on her PhD, so I wanted to be with her. So I started working on my doctorate, and so at UNC Charlotte, and so I got my doctorate. And then when I finished that urge then to get back in law school happened. I took the LSAT. I did fairly well on it. At this point, I'm more disciplined, and I go to law school, and kind of the rest is history. So the truth of it is, I ended up and it was a great career, and I loved education. But the truth of it is, law was always my first passion. I just didn't get in because, as I'm sure people are telling you all to take your studies seriously, I didn't take my studies seriously. I did enough to graduate, but I didn't do enough to get into a professional school post-graduation. There's another question. Oh, yes, ma'am. Sir. Yes, ma'am.
You said Suits isn't like, as real as it's made to be, but is there anything on there that you can say is real or, that actually ties into being a lawyer?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Thank you for asking that question. I have been told that show is really good, and my sister and my brother-in-law love it, and my nephew. And so I have seen an episode of it, so I must admit that I'm not an expert on Suits, but the work is real. The long hours that they're working, that you see them in the office, long hours, the camaraderie that you can build with a lot of your colleagues, that's certainly real. Some of the money you can make is real. That's about the extent of it. But, trying to go through a case in an hour and solve complex issues and complex trials in an hour, or preparing for a case in an hour, that's just not realistic. Most of our cases last for years. Most of them are, long, drawn out, complex issues. And Suits, from my understanding, they mostly win. That's not the reality either. There's no lawyer that wins all of the time. I'm asked oftentimes by clients, what's your winning rate? And I always tell, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I always tell clients I lose more than I win, because as lawyers, ethically, we're not supposed to give clients, we're not supposed to project whether we're going to win or lose, or what a judge is going to rule, and all those things. And they do all those things on Suits, and that's just not realistic. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh, that's a whole nother lecture. So my doctorate is in educational leadership, with an emphasis on African American studies, and quite frankly, and I will tell anyone, and this is not to be braggadocious, but it's the truth, I never heard the term critical race theory until I was in a legitimate doctoral program at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. I didn't hear it as a high school student, certainly. Never heard it in undergrad, never heard it in graduate school at Winthrop. Heard it for the first time as a doctoral student. I heard it more on an intellectual, academic, esoteric level in law school. It's a term in law school that's really the way that it has been hijacked by politicians. It's just totally incorrect, totally not the way. And I would love to have an opportunity to come back here and have a full discussion on critical race theory from my understanding of it as a person who studied it at a doctoral level and at a law school level. It's more of a legal term, and it's more of a legal construct of how African Americans and other people interact with the greater society and view things. It's just this political term that it makes white people feel bad about who they are. It's just totally not true. And I often ask my friends, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I read Huckleberry Finn and all those, and I remember sitting in some of the higher level classes as the only Black kid in there, and no one ever asked me how I felt. And that was before people start saying the N word. They actually said the word when they were reading and those things. So I take great offense to that, and certainly I take great, as someone who's read all of my life and have read some very hurtful things and still read a lot. I was very pleased, and some of my friends laugh at this, but I'm going to say it. I got actually, Clarence Thomas actually autographed and wrote my name in it to Montreal, etc., and autographed his autobiography for me. And so I am reading it now. I totally disagree with probably 99.9% of Clarence Thomas's legal positions and the positions he has taken on things. But that still, it doesn't hurt me to read his autobiography and try to understand his thought process. And so I would love to have a full conversation with you about critical race theory. The way that it's being hijacked in the, let me end my answer there because I'll get started about this and I'll talk the rest of the morning. Are there any other questions? Let's go to lunch one day. I'd love to have that conversation, and I'll buy. Seriously, I'm serious about that. Any other question? Was that the bell to end? No, okay. Other questions? Now I'm in the room with a bunch of bright students that I have not gone to Northern North Carolina to be with my family in their time of need. I am not going to stand here and not have some more questions. All right, so now we can switch. You can ask the gory details about cases because that always interests people. We're done with the intellectual stuff. What do you all want to know about the day-to-day? Yes, sir. All right, that always gets us started. Say again. So there are two cases that I'm probably most proud of. One is, and this is, so one case is a criminal case, and one case is a civil case. So I had a very famous franchise, and we did sign a non-disclosure, so I can't tell you what the franchise is. But we had a driver was texting. He was making a delivery for a franchise, and he was texting as he was making this delivery. And my client came through a red light, and this franchise driver turned in front of my driver and my client had a bad car accident. The call came into my office because the delivery driver, needed to go to court because he had gotten a ticket for failing to stop at failure to yield at a red light, to let the car come through. I think both lights were green, but you have to yield and let this car come through before you turn left. And my client was hurt pretty badly. And when the call came through, these were just unsophisticated, poor African-American people who just wanted somebody to be in court because they didn't want this driver who had hurt their loved one ticket not to be prosecuted. And they wanted the judge to know that their loved one was just in the hospital, and that's why he wasn't in court. Well, the reality of it is he was in the hospital and he was paralyzed from his neck down. He was never going to walk again. And they still had hope that he was going to walk, and because it was early on, the accident was fresh, that he was going to walk, he was going to be okay, and whatever. And so I got involved and I went and did this pro bono. And at this point, I learned more about the case. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is a pretty serious case. And so I represented that family. And I'm a little guy who went up against this big national corporate giant. And, we are a two-man lawyer firm over here. And we took on this big giant and we filed suit and we fought him and we fought him. Now, unfortunately, in the middle of the suit, I sued him for $10 million. In the middle of the suit, my client died. And unfortunately, if he had lived, I think this case was we probably would have gotten the whole $10 million. But we settled that lawsuit for about $4.5 million for the family because our guy died. Now that created, certainly they lost their loved ones, but now I see that family, and that had just created a quantum change in how this family now is able to live and what they're able to do. My second case was actually a young African-American male. He was accused of a very horrible crime down in Chester. Actually, this just happened. You guys can look at it. There were two of them. One was Breonta Stevens, and you guys can Google it and look it up. He was a young rapper here, and the other one was a guy named Kenneth Redfern. And I represented both of them on and matter of fact, the Breonta Stevens is on Dateline. And I mean, it was a big deal because they deemed it a mass shooting down in Chester. And I represented Breonta Stevens, and he was accused of killing. It was a club shooting. It was a rap concert one night, and he was accused of killing 2 people and wounding 8 others. So 10 people total were shot. And, and the evidence just didn't bear that out. And we represented him in a two-week trial right in Lancaster a year ago. And we were able to get him acquitted on, we admitted he shot the first guy in self-defense. And then of course that bullet, he was shooting a .40 caliber. So it went through and hit the second guy, hit a girl. but he got acquitted of killing all the other people and shooting all the other people. And then Kenneth Redfern was a murder case that we strongly believed, and I believe to this day, did not kill these two people, and he got acquitted 2 weeks ago. So not 2 weeks ago, about 2 or 3 months ago. So I'm really, really proud of that work. Now, nobody likes criminal defense attorneys, so I recognize that, and I've just come to accept that. And many of my colleagues, particularly those who want to be in politics and stuff, you know, they don't get involved in criminal defense. But the truth of the matter is, and I say this publicly, no one likes a criminal defense attorney until they're in trouble or their family members are in trouble. And then, you know, so many of my colleagues who won't do criminal defense, I've represented their family members. I've represented, you know, probably the most controversial case I've been involved in is I represented the guy who was accused of killing the police officer here locally. So a couple of 5 or 6 Martin Luther King Day, we had a gentleman, his name is Christian McCall. You guys, again, you can Google that. He was accused of killing a police officer and wounding a couple other police officers here locally. And of course, that was a pretty controversial case because you represent the guy who killed a police officer. But I strongly believe, and as I often tell my friends, particularly my conservative friends, you can't believe in the First Amendment. You can't believe in that Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, but you don't believe in the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment, and you don't believe in the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. So you can't believe that we ain't slaves anymore. You can't, so you hear people always talk about, you know, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, or I have right on January the 20th. That's their First Amendment right to do what they did. And I have a right to have as many guns as I want. But then when it comes to how we treat people accused of crimes, then I have a pushback on that. So I never shy away from the work that I do, particularly as a criminal defense attorney, because if, you know, to me, the Constitution is like the Bible. Either you believe all of it or you believe none of it, period. There is no in between for me. And so, and I choose to believe all of both of them. And that's it. And I don't apologize for it. That's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. So the question is the one that's always asked, you know, how do you represent people that you believe is wrong? And so the answer for me is very simple. So the answer is, I always tell clients, I have never, ever asked a client, did you do it on the criminal side? I've never asked a client that. Now, what I do say to clients is I cannot represent you if you will not be honest with me. I cannot be blindsided. I don't know what the other side may have, but let me tell you what our Constitution says. And this is truly not a cop-out. I mean, I know that Dr. McCorn has been a long-time pastor, and I've heard him. If you've ever heard him speak, you can tell that what he says comes from his heart, that he absolutely believed that Bible from Genesis to Revelations. I have no doubt about that. And I feel the same way about the Bible, but I also feel the same way about the Constitution. And what our Constitution says is that every citizen charged with a crime, it is the government's responsibility to bring the charges and bring the conviction. And so my job, oftentimes, when my client is guilty, and the facts, as I have discovered them, says most probably my client did this, it is still the government's responsibility to bring that case. And the reason why I say that, if we ever, as citizens, get to a point where we believe that this person just needs to be picked up, thrown in jail without due process of law, then that doesn't separate our country from China, from Russia, from North Korea, any of those places. So we have a foundation that's called our Constitution. So oftentimes, I am the person standing between the citizen and the government. And if the government proves its case, because I told you the 2 cases I won, now I'll tell you a case I lost. There was a guy from Rock Hill, and I think this one was a pretty big deal in the newspaper because I made it a big deal. So at this time, and that's a large law firm here in town, it's called Morton & Gaddis. The actually Gaddis part of it, he's the mayor of Rock Hill. He has his law partners, a guy named Jim Morton. Jim Morton is a good friend of mine and is a very famed criminal defense attorney here in town. There was a drug bust out near Northwestern High School 2 or 3 years ago, And there was a guy who was caught in this drug bust. His name was Ricky Tate. Ricky Tate got charged with, and I won't give you all the details because that's not important, but Ricky Tate got charged with four drug charges, with 3 drug charges and 1 proximity within a school drug charge because it's illegal to have drugs near a school. So I was lead attorney, and Jimbo Morton was second chair on this case. We represented Ricky Tate, in York County decided to seek life without parole for Ricky Tate for what essentially was $100 worth of drugs. Because that was his 3rd strike. And they did. They served us with a life notice, and he was 41 years old. They served us with a life notice, and we tried the case. He got acquitted on 3 of the drug charges, got convicted on the 4th drug charge because on the body cam, you see him running down the hall, and it appears that he's throwing a drug out of the window. And he argued he didn't. But nevertheless, the jury convicted him. Ricky Tate got life without parole at 41 years old for less than $100 worth of drugs. Now, I lost that case. I respect the jury system, but that is one that still keeps me. I forget the wins. It's the losses, because I heard a mother behind me at a 41-year-old kid going to prison for the rest of her life. And if you're talking about the most passionate speech I have ever heard in a courtroom about justice, it was Jim Morton and Geddes, admonishing the system in York County. And you'll never see that in a newspaper, but pull the transcript. How he admonished York County, the police department, who sought a life sentence for a young African-American male over less than $100 worth of drugs. And the thing about Ricky Tate, and I made this argument to the court, his first 2 strikes, he got 20 years ago. 20 years ago, during the crack epidemic in the early 90s, he was actually arrested, got 2 strikes, and did 18 years in prison and came out a drug addict. And so he's in this house doing drugs. He wasn't selling drugs, but our threshold amount in South Carolina is so small. If there are any of you weed smokers out here, our threshold is so small that PWID pushed him into a strike, and that's possession with intent to distribute. And most of my people who smoke marijuana say that that's such a small amount. And anyway, so I'm going on about, but there are times when I do represent people that the facts indicate, and then sometimes when the facts do that, quite frankly, with a lot of my clients, I then try to work out a deal where they are held accountable for what they did, but it just doesn't take their whole lives away from them. But I've also had people, I represented a guy one time who was just absolutely an evil human being, and he needs to be incarcerated. He's just a human, he's an evil human being who does not need to be in society, and he is doing a life sentence. 40 years die in prison because he was in his mid-40s, and his life expectancy in prison, and he truly does need to be there. He's a bad person who needs to be there. All right. Any other questions? I see Ms. Knox getting up. All right, we got 2 more questions and I'll be done. Yes, ma'am.
Do lawyers get mostly involved, and if so, how do they do it?
Oh man, you are now. See, I love this part of these are phenomenal questions. So let me start on the front end of my question, and then I'm gonna go to, and then let me start on the front end. That among lawyers and doctors and professions is the highest suicide rate. I will tell you, it's pretty public knowledge. I had an attorney, young man, phenomenal young man, who worked in the office with me, smart, from Rock Hill, born and raised 2 years ago, 2020, so 3 years ago, right here in Rock Hill, committed suicide. He was a young lawyer, worked with me, left my office, went and became a prosecutor. He and his girlfriend started having issues, and he committed suicide. We had another young African-American lawyer here. He and I were actually the same age. 10 years ago, he committed suicide. had another young Black lawyer. And so I take a lot of interest in African-American, particularly male lawyers who come here because the last few who've gotten disbarred or committed suicide here have been African-American males in our legal community here in Rock Hill. Now, obviously, because it's suicide, a lot of this doesn't get in the newspaper, but it's a fact that all of us at the bar know. The bar now requires us to do mental health every year. I have to do drug and alcohol and substance abuse counseling. They call it a continuing legal education, but I have to do it every year on the dangers of alcohol and drugs. I will tell you, in my profession, obviously I hang out with a lot of other lawyers. I am concerned about a lot of my colleagues. They drink a lot. Every event we have is around alcohol, and typically it's at an establishment where alcohol, and normally it's always an open bar. Generally with lawyers, there's extra money to drink a lot. I'm also concerned with a lot of my friends who they just have the resources and doctors. So they got prescription medicines that most other people will have to go to the street and get, but they can get. So I do see it a lot. To answer your question, much of that is involved because of the emotions that we can do. I think there are a couple of things that helped me. One, I had a very solid nuclear family. I'm extremely close with my wife. I'm extremely close with my children. I have a phenomenal church family. I have solid friends that have been friends for a long time. One is, who works here, Herbert Crump. I can call Crump when I need to and vent, and we can talk and laugh, and he gives advice, and there's no judgment, and we can just be men talking to each other. I needed a pastor. He could be a pastor. And also my close relationship with my brothers, my biological brothers and my sister. I exercise, I run, and then I didn't have habits coming into this. And so my grandfather told me, I was reared by my grandparents, and my grandfather told me when I was young, he said, a man who has habits, your habits will always compete with your family. And I have never forgotten that. And so I've tried not to develop, and I'm telling you all as young people, do not develop habits now that will compete with your family when you get older. I never did drugs. I was never a heavy drinker. So I stayed away from all those things. And I also chose an area of law that I can deal with. Now, I am human. I represented a guy one time who was accused of a drive-by shooting down in Chester. And the person who was killed was a 14-year-old girl. So I got that autopsy, and I'm seeing a 14-year-old child who's the exact same age as my daughter laying on a table with bullet holes in her on an autopsy. I'm human. Yes, that emotionally bothered me, but I've learned things. I'm an avid runner. I mean, I run more days than I don't run. And that's how I've learned to do this. I used to do family work. I found that I just could not do family work. I just couldn't do people arguing over children. Here I am, wanted my daddy to be in my life. And these people here are arguing about, because daddy showed up 5 minutes late to bring the kids back from a visitation. So I didn't have the emotional quotient to handle family work. So I stopped doing it. So I've chosen my practice based on what I emotionally could handle, but it is very difficult at times to separate you emotionally. You just have to try to find healthy habits and healthy people to surround yourself with. That's the best answer I can give. And don't create habits at this age. I've never been a weed smoker, so why start at 50? People are surprised when I tell them that I've been in the Army, I've done a PA, I've done a doctorate, and I've done a law degree, and I've never drank coffee a day in my life. Couldn't tell you what it tastes like. I love the smell of it, but I've never tasted it in my life, because when I was in the military, I had a Colonel Bounds. He had to have a black cup of coffee early in the morning. And at 3 o'clock, he had to have another cup of coffee. And if he didn't have it, he just couldn't function. And so I opted, watching him, not to do it. So anyway, is that time? All right. Thank you all so much.
I just wanted to express my gratitude to, let me back up. Great morning. Good to see all of you today. I want to express my gratitude to my friend, Montreal Belton. What you got here was invaluable. And I know, because I sat where you sat, you bring in these profound speakers who drop these nuggets and you don't really catch it at the time, but sometimes later on it comes to you. And I hope you will see how important this conversation is, not only for your education, but for your life. One of the major tenets of our jurisprudence system is equal justice under the law. And in America, that has not been the case. In principle, it has, but in application and administration, that has not been the case for us, which is why your education is so important. And I want you gave me an idea, Montreal, that maybe we should, I don't know if we'll be able to fit it in this semester, but maybe in the spring, have a forum and a panel discussion around critical race theory. Because critical race theory is actually interdisciplinary. It's mainly a law concept. And I learned about it in grad school. Derek Bell, who famous professor at Harvard Law School, was one of the major proponents of critical race theory, but how it impacts every part of our lives. So I wanted to, before I sat down, I wanted to give you all a couple of assignments, not mandatory, but I think it would help you. One is, if you have not seen the book, you ought to get the book, The New Jim Crow. The New Jim Crow. Is this mic on? Testing, 1, 2, 3. The New Jim Crow. You all should find that book by Michelle Alexander. And it is a brilliant discussion of how, going back to the war on drugs, that's really how we got to where we are now. The war on drugs in the 70s and then the 80s has impacted our system in such a way that many of our young African-American men and women, who could be your parents and grandparents, lost their lives caught up in the system. And the second thing is a documentary called 13th. Anyone seen 13th? You should go watch 13th. It's on YouTube, actually. 13th, it's about the 13th Amendment, which really says, hear me clearly, that slavery never really ended. Right? So what is the new form of slavery? The criminal justice system. It is the new form of slavery. And the 13th Amendment explains how that has happened and why we are where we are today. Don't want to, again, I don't want to damper the discussion. I just want us to put it in context so that we see how important our education is. You're here today because you are called to make a difference. And you shouldn't just be concerned about my four and no more, me, myself, and I, but you got to be concerned about those who are counting on you, your family members who spent a lot of money for you to go to school, and people who are rooting for you. You have a responsibility to help represent them. So The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, 13th, which is by Ava DuVernay. Some of y'all, what's that show that Ava DuVernay had on? Something Sugar. Queen Sugar. Queen Sugar, that's Ava DuVernay. She also did the 13th documentary. So you all should check that out. So once again, Mr. Belton, thank you so much for sharing with us today. And y'all take him up on the offer. You should not let him get out of here. If you're interested in a career in law or politics for that matter, you should grab a hold of this gentleman before he gets out of here. It would be a great experience for you to encounter him. And if you're so inclined, if he's offering a job opportunity or an internship, you should certainly talk to him before he leaves here today. I'm now going to turn this over to Ms. Knox. Thank you.
All right, can we give Mr. Belton one healthy hand clap as we wrap up this afternoon? Thank you so much. We're going to have our announcements by Ms. Tamara Johnson. Y'all give her a round of applause as she comes up.
Good morning. My name is Tamara, and here are announcements for the week. Wellness Women Wednesday is today at 3 p.m. in the multipurpose room. There will be a guest speaker, Ms. Gail Estella, who is a survivor of domestic violence and will discuss the signs and solution to end domestic violence. Today is the last day to vote for your favorite pumpkin here in the digital library. Please stop by the counter and enter your vote. National Authors Day is on November 1st. The digital library will like to recognize and celebrate the work of some of our faculty, staff, alumni, and members of the Board of Trustees. If you are interested in having your work featured, please use the QR code below by Thursday, October 26th. The library will be hosting a movie night featuring The Black Phone on Monday, October 30th from 7 to 9 p.m. See you there. The library also presents Family Game Night on Thursday, November 2nd from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Games will be included Uno, Bingo, Jenga, Domino, Scrabble, Just Dance, Jeopardy, and more. There will be a competition between the students and the staff. Lastly, if you are missing a pair of headphones or AirPods from the previous Beacon Forums, please see Mrs. Knox.
Thank you. Thank you again, Attorney Belton, for those words of wisdom. We appreciate it. And good afternoon. You guys always look great. If you have registered, thank you, thank you, thank you. We can't wait to continue your journey with you as you prepare to come back for the spring semester. So this announcement is just to let you know, if you have not completed the registration, please do so. They're still registering students in the ACE building. All you need to do is make an appointment to see your advisor. So again, we appreciate it. And we want everyone to finish their journey to graduation. So thank you again.
Freshmen, this is your moment. A few seconds to fill in those questions. Okay, and this is for everyone to participate. Final survey. And as you're wrapping up, go ahead and stand to your feet. We'll sing the alma mater and we will pray and we will leave together. Clinton, our dear old school, for thee we reign and rule, for thee we take our stand to honor thee. We'll honor, cherish thee, as down life's path we flee. Clinton, our dear old school, we love you so. When we enter her gate, when we our classes take, we pledge allegiance true to honor thee. We'll honor, cherish thee, as down life's path we flee. Clinton, our dear old school, we love you so. We'll honor, cherish thee, as down life's path we flee. Clinton, our dear old school, we love you so. We love you so. We love you so. Please welcome Dr. Fight as he closes us out in prayer.
Let us pray. From the fruit of the tree to the beast of the ground, bless the food that we shall receive. And as we depart from this place, never your presence continue to guide us, lead us, and protect us along life's journey. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I passed church.